Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Palm Springs. Now, Palm Springs, if you didn't know, is a time loop movie, much like Groundhog Day, or a bunch of movies that I would have probably compared to Groundhog Day, at least in concept. Palm Springs takes that on in sort of a very different approach. Now, it is about a man played by Andy Samberg, Niles, who is stuck in an infinite time loop at his girlfriend's friend's wedding. He's stuck in this time loop, and he suddenly, because there's a time loop in a cave, and somehow he got in this cave with a time loop or whatever, and he accidentally gets this girl, played by Kristen Milioti, goes into the time loop as well, and they're stuck going in this time loop sort of together. By that, this is a very different kind of time loop movie, because most of them it's sort of a singular experience. Basically, everyone else in those movies, whether it be a Happy Death Day or a Groundhog Day or a Source Code or a movie I forgot about, maybe you have to refill everybody in again, and it's hard to get anywhere. But this, you have two people experiencing it sort of together, as well as J.K. Simmons as well, but he doesn't have as much to do with the plot. But there's been a lot written and said about that in a post quarantine or pre or during quarantine time, that this feels like the most perfect time to release a film like this. And I sort of get that, because it does feel like you're living in and out the same day, because you're not going anywhere. It feels like nothing's changing. It feels like everything's falling apart. What's the point of existence? And I would say all these movies have that point where the character, or like in Groundhog Day, where they sort of lose the will to live, where they're like, what's the point of any of this? And certainly this film does get into bigger philosophical meanings of the idea of what is moralism. If no one remembers whether you're doing anything right, is there a point to it? Is it moral? Is it completely not make any sense? Is there no reason at all to be moral if there's no consequences in it? Or be a good person? Or can you be a good person one day and just be a terrible, awful person the next day because there's absolutely no consequences? And this brings all of that up. Basically, it goes through the idea that if you really had no consequences, what would that life be like? Would you just get drunk all day? Would you just eat too much? Would you not care about who you had sex with or how you treated people? And I do think this is interesting in that I often will say I do find morally and interestingly and philosophically, I find this film really enriching and fun. I had a good time watching this movie. My wife and I watched it. We had fun. We laughed. It was a good night together watching a film and so forth. But I think I like the complications and the ideas of going through these time loops in more of a comedic way. And I get that we've done that so many times, where it's like, well, if you're going to do this at a certain point, what are you going to say with doing a time loop sort of movie? And certainly, yes, it is sort of interesting the things they do with it, which is probably why this film's a lot more interesting to most people, because it does push in a completely different direction. If we're being honest, I find what Happy Death Day is doing a lot more interesting, because there's a lot of details in a very structured kind of film like that you can kind of glance over, but there's a lot of meaning in. Also, I think that movie's more fun. This is not aiming to really do that, so maybe it's a not fair comparison, but I do like that Andy Samberg we don't see go into a time loop. We understand he's been in this forever. He's so long, he says he doesn't remember his job, which might not actually be true. Maybe he doesn't even want to get into it, because that's depressing to think about, because his life isn't advancing at all. But the idea that you're getting someone who's been in this time loop forever with someone else who's newly experiencing it. I do kind of like what this does with it. I did find it interesting, but the funny thing about this time loop movie versus most of them is most of them I've actually seen a lot of times. I'm kind of into time travel stuff and loops and things like that. It's fun to me. I don't know, I'm weird, but I didn't really watch this film and think I would necessarily see it again. But part of me thinks that's not this movie. This movie is meant to kind of get into the existentialism of being an adult and understanding whether it is good to be a good person, which in a sense is the same conclusion as Groundhog Day. But I think how it gets to that conclusion, and most of these movies, how it gets that conclusion is different, and how they change is really become realizing being stuck in this thing and trying to learn yourself through it. And most of these do that, but they won't get out of it by doing it, being a good person. I also like that Andy Samberg, this is a far more dramatic role for him. I'm glad he didn't do like some Judd Apatow movie where it goes into his childhood or some nonsense like that. It more is, him still being the comic persona that is Andy Samberg while being dramatic at the same time. This doesn't feel like too much of a different thing, and I really do like Andy Samberg. I also think this is the big film for Kristen Milotti, who previously was on How I Met Your Mother as the mother in the final season, which nobody liked. She had some roles, and I feel like she's always been a good actress, but I don't think anyone's really appreciated her until like this movie, which is cool. I did feel like she was really great in this, and it made you go like, who is this like cool, amazing new star or something? It brought you to paying attention to her. It made you like realize how charismatic and how wonderful she really is. And I think having a charismatic female lead, this goes back to even like, classic Hollywood, when you have a really charismatic female lead and a guy who's like, yeah, whatever, this is like another thing, who cares, I'm like so sick of this life or whatever. That goes back to like either Roman Holiday, or you go to It Happened One Night. Like so many of these films do that, but it works so well in this. They have great chemistry together. I really, really like her. I do think that this might be, like a lot of people have said, this might be like the beginning of sort of a rise for her. And to be honest, like this, I always thought she was good. I just felt like she never had like the right role, and I feel like this is the right role. It also has a great cast. J.K. Simmons, who is always looking for interesting roles and continues to do that, and is able to be villainous and fatherly in the same fucking movie, because J.K. Simmons does so much. He's great, and he's great in this. He's just a reliably great actor, as well as Peter Gallagher's in this. We don't appreciate Peter Gallagher enough. He's kind of just one of the people stuck in the time loop. I give people like that a lot of credit because they're reusing the same lines over and over again, with sometimes with very little deviation, and to make that as interesting and believable as it is probably is not a small feat. I still wonder how they edit films like this, because how much they probably have to mark up like exactly like what each shot is, like very specifically, because you can't be like, well, can I use this? Oh no, but that was on time loop 27 or something, or do they have time loops marked? I would love to watch a documentary on how they edit a time loop movie. Maybe that's just me, but I think about these things anytime I watch one. I do think Palm Springs is a really enjoyable film, and I think it one of the things you have to admit watching it is it really does go into more of the philosophy of dealing with being in an infinite time loop and the existentialism of it. And you could say that's like a metaphor for literally existence itself. And I'm like, yeah, I guess, yeah, it kind of is. And especially right now, if you feel like you're kind of stuck in that one place. But I think much like what this movie is saying is, if you're stuck in that one place and you're like, does it matter? Does anyone care? You should find your way to kind of try to make the world better, And maybe that's not the coolest thing. Maybe you don't want to hear this while watching this review or something like that, but it's much better, and you'll feel much better if you are good to people and you try to do your best by people. And I think that is what these films are ultimately about, because I think they are, much like most sci-fi or horror, and this is a sort of a sci-fi concept, they're all metaphors, and the metaphorical idea of this whole thing is that I don't know if in some ways this does feel like time loops have reached this point of like a genre, like much like, westerns, where you see how many stagecoach films can you see, how many slasher films can you see, how many, Die Hard in the films can you see, and for them to still feel as interesting and fresh. And I guess like, whereas A Happy Death Day really surprised me, this was like expecting something and it kind of met me. I don't think it's as funny as any like Pop Star was absolutely hilarious. I don't think this is that. It's definitely pushing in a different direction. I know it's considered a Lonely Island kind of film, and I love the Lonely Island classics thing at the beginning, made me laugh. This is directed by Max Barbacow, sort of big feature debut. All these directed stuff before this, and they more produced it. They had nothing to do with the writing. Maybe they gave notes or something, but basically they're not wholly responsible for this. This is its own thing. I think it was kind of uses that sort of Lonely Island humor in certain respects. I definitely think like they do funny things with these time loops. They definitely mess with people. They do fun stuff. They don't just like get drunk and like get in car accidents accidents and shit like that. They actually do funny things. Like, it's in the trailer about the idea of, like, there's a bomb in this cake, and they, like, do this whole, like, funny bit. And it's funny, and it loosens the film up, and it also gets you to sort of like them, because you can see they have, like, fun doing goofy stuff together. So, and I think this film, like, sort of feeds into that. In terms of time loop movies, maybe this isn't my personal favorite. I like these kind of films. I mean, it's like Groundhog Day is the top, but whatever. But maybe I'm more of a Happy Death Day person than this. I still like it. I still appreciate it. Maybe it's a little too, like, indie movie meaning kind of film, but it sort of works within its own time loop thing. You know, you can hate indie movies that do that because you see too many of them, but at a certain point it's like, yeah, but this isn't just like, you know, he was drunk at one wedding and whatever. That wouldn't be as interesting as what this is actually doing, and is really using that to kind of show you all the possibilities that you can talk about with a plot like an infinite time loop, and feeling like literally being stuck in time, not feeling like you're stuck in time like a coming of age film normally is. So I really like this film. It's definitely a fun movie. It's definitely a good time. I don't think I have fallen in love with it as much as everyone else. I've noticed some people hate it. I'm definitely not in there. But it's not like this absolute revelation to me necessarily. But I definitely love everything it accomplishes, everything it is telling, everything it is saying philosophically, and with kind of this existential bent to a time loop movie, and trying to find kind of like who you are morally, and why morally you should always do the right thing, regardless if it matters or not. So if you've seen Palm Springs and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.